big car.
Well, there's turbo and then there's turbo. You know, how many PSI?
I had 21. I was running 21 PSI at the time, which was the max I could run.
So you're pushing
I
upward.
needed a bigger turbo at that point.
So you're pushing upwards of 220 plus horses. Yeah.
I really wanted to switch to a T3, T4 hybrid and run 27 PSI, because I had the intercooler to do it, but I just never did it.
Is it air to air or air to
air to air?
water?
But it was 3 feet by about 5 inches deep by 2 feet tall. So
you can put it on the roof.
Yeah, no kidding. No, it was. I changed radiators and switched to a smaller radiator so it fit in front of the radiator, and then the radiator would fit right between the intake, the ends of the radiator or the intercooler.
Yeah.
It came out of an international bus, and so it was plenty big enough. Had 3-inch inlet and outlet on it, and it was massive. I never had a pinging problem running 21 PSI. I could run 21 PSI in regular. It cooled it enough to run fine.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. This is the homework that was due today, and I finished a lot of grading, I think sometime last night or this morning, I cannot remember.
I saw that.
Okay. So I finished a lot of grading. The pre and post condition one is still not graded yet because that one definitely will need more time. I need one big block of time to grade that one. The other ones are mostly graded. So I think I'm almost up to date with all the grading.
Just in time to get some more stuff to grade.
Yes, but that's always more. Yep. All right, so we'll talk about the solution of this particular homework first, because I always want to make sure that we know what the correct answer is. Even if it is not graded, you should know what the answer is. And this one, I don't think it's a really particularly difficult homework assignment. It's just a combination of things that we already know at this point. So we'll go ahead and just work this one out. We don't need comments because there's no conditional statement, no print, so we don't need comments. We'll start with line number. There are no global variables either, so we don't need, there's nothing to say about the precondition. Are there any questions at this point about this homework assignment? Yep.
So when you do 9, 10, and 11, the lines, that gives you the time, the hour of the day, and then the minute of the day, and the second of the day?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes. Well, that's the intent. Okay, we'll figure out whether that actually does it or not.
My days don't have 28 hours.
You mean the hour part?
I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. Because I was just looking at this, because this, okay, I can analyze this because E mod 86400 means that the result has to be from 0 to 86399. And then if you divide that by 3600, it has to be less than or equal to 24.
Yeah, okay.
It has to be less than 24 for sure because we're taking the floor of that too. Yep.
What does that mod command actually do?
It's a modulus. It's the modulo, of, but you can look at it as the remainder of a division.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We encountered the mod operator the first time when we talked about factoring. In the top-down, design, module, we talked about factoring, and that's the first time we encountered the mod operator. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with line 17, the only line that is outside of the definition of a subroutine. And then that will get us into subroutine stub, but subroutine stub has a local variable T1. So we have to allocate for the return line number. That's the easy part because line 17 is the last line, so the next line will be post. And then we have to allocate storage for T1. Now this time you have to be careful because T1, the type of T1, if you look at line 14 of the subroutine, the type of T1 is not an integer, it is a time structure. So you have to look at the record time and look at the definition. It has 3 components. Now each component is an integer, so we can use 1 column per component inside the time. So that means T1 has components. The first one is hour, the second one is minute, and the last one is second. Within each component, we have to remember to put question marks because we do not know the initial value of a local variable. So in this case, T1 itself is a local variable, and therefore each component of it also has an unknown value. Are we doing okay so far? Concepts. That's going to be loud on the in the recording. Keep forgetting duct tape. Any questions at this point? No questions? Okay. So once we set up the columns, we can go into the subroutine. The subroutine starts on line 15. So line 15 is here. And all it's doing is to invoke another subroutine called epoch to time. Epoch to time is up here. It has two parameters. One passed by value, the other one passed by reference. So on line 15, we have to set up some additional columns or allocate some additional columns. The first one is a return line number. Because the invocation is on line 15, line 16 in this case is the next line. When it comes back, it has to go continue on line 16. And then the next two columns we have to set up. One is for the by-val parameter E. The by-val parameter E just has a big number, like this guy here. So I just copy and paste it. And then the other parameter is T. Now T is a little bit more interesting because it is passed by reference. So we are not going to create three columns here. Instead, we'll make this an alias of the columns of the original item. When you look at the invocation, I'm using T1, which is my local variable in stub, to specify parameter T for epoch to time. T1, if you look this up, is actually making out of column C to column E. I cannot merge for some reason. It's not letting me merge. I think I have to save the document first. Let me save the document into today's folder. Now, will it let me do it? Nope, still won't let me do it. That is interesting.
Are you under web view?
Sorry?
Are you under web view? Are you under the web view?
Under web view? No, it's normal. Okay, let me try it on. Nope, it doesn't let me merge any columns.
I was having the same problem. I was trying to merge them.
I know why. Because I turned on change logging. It has to do with change logging. If I turn off the recording, it will let me do it. It's okay. We can use another way to represent it. I can go to format cells and then use borders to help me identify just the border of the entire thing. So now I know you cannot really see it, but when you print it out, it's more obvious that way. Okay, so T is also known as the columns of T1. T1 is using column C to column E, so that's the way you represent passive by reference. Yep.
Could you allocate 3 columns for hour, minute, and second, and then say that the hour was aka column C? And then
That's not quite what is happening in the computer when you have a program that is passing by reference. So I guess in this class you will get partial credit for that because you're still referring back to those individual columns. But in reality, when you write a similar program in C or Java, passing by reference means you only have one single reference to go back to the original object. So technically speaking, it does not represent what is going on in your program when you are actually using that feature. But in this class, we'll just say, it's close. All right. So now that we have all the columns set up, we continue in the subroutine. The subroutine, just has a whole bunch of arithmetic operations to perform. The first one is taking the floor of the mod operation divided by 3600. I think someone, I took a quick look at the homework submissions, and someone used the spreadsheet function to do it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I will just kind of do it that way too. The floor of the mod of this number and 8 6400, which is the number of seconds in a day, and then the whole thing divided by 3600. And floor also requires you to specify the significance, which in this case should be 1, and that gives me 16, which is 4 p.m. And then we move on to line 10. Does everybody understand why column C is updated but not column H? Because it's passed by reference. T is also known as column C to column E. Within column C to column E, the one column that has the name of hour or has the member hour is column C, and that's why column C is updated. Moving on to line 10, we have to do another mod operation, but this time we want to divide the result by 60 and then take the floor of that. That will give us the minute of the day, or the minute of that time. So we have equal and then floor again, and then we have mod again this time, same number, but this time we want to mod it with 3600, and then whatever the result of the mod is, we want to divide that by 60, and then we want to change or specify the significance of the floor function to be unit, which is 1, and that's 49 minutes. And then on line 11, we are just doing a simple mod in this case to get to the second of that particular time. So it's just mod this number by 60, and that's 46. So that means the time is 4 p.m. 49:46. Are we doing okay so far with the calculations? And then we move on to line 12. Line 12 is the end of the subroutine. So it has two things to do. One is to specify where we are going to continue execution, and the other part is to deallocate the columns for this invocation. So we'll go ahead and deallocate. Like so. And then on line 16, there's not really a whole lot to do because line 16 is also an defined sub. So we have to identify those columns that we want to deallocate. Mark it here. Oh, make sure that we continue at post. And then we can go back and mark these columns as deallocated. And that's the end of the trace. Are there any questions about this trace? Yep, go ahead.
So what if we did everything like you did it except for somehow screwed up the formulas in the spreadsheet and we got different numbers?
That's a minor thing, because the main objective of this is to understand how to use passing by reference and how to use records. So as long as you update the correct columns, you will still get most of the credit. Yeah, the calculation part is it's a little bit messy.
I couldn't get floor and mod to work in the same cell. I had to do mod and then take the floor of that cell.
Oh, okay, I see.
So somehow
I see. No, it's not a big deal. That part is not the main focus of this assignment. Yep. Any other questions about this homework assignment? Yes?
So on line 14, that's when the actual object, the record, is created.
On line 14, you mean in the program or in the trace? In the program. Over here. Is that the line that you're talking about?
So line 17, actually, in the program.
Line 17?
So that's one.
It's kind of hard to say. In this class, I cannot really tell you who is responsible to allocate the columns. When you go to cisp300, when you take cisp300, we will know for sure, who is responsible to allocate those columns. But at this point, we'll just say that, the invocation, the action of the invocation is doing that. But to give you just a little bit more information, the invocation of a subroutine is divided into two parts. One part is done by the invoke statement, and the other part is done by the subroutine that you're invoking. Okay, so the answer to your question is it is done by the invocation, but it's when the subroutine gets invoked. Yeah. Okay, I need to do something. Sorry?
On a flat surface.
On a flat surface. Yeah, that means I have to stay closer to the mic. All right. Any other questions about this? Yep, go ahead.
Since we couldn't merge the cells either, is it going to be all right as long as
that's fine. Yes. Yeah, as long as you identify that T1 has 3 columns, that will be fine. If you want to put T1s in this cell and also this cell, that works too. But even without anything, just that even without a border, that's fine too. Yep. All right. Any other questions about this homework assignment? No other questions? Okay. Now next, let me check the schedule when we are having our final exam. Does anyone know for sure? Sorry?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday?
Even the Thursday afterwards.
I said the 10th, right?
Next Thursday at 10. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
11.
No, it's probably the 10th because it's
Final start on Thursday?
yeah.
Oh, okay. That works.
Let me just double check.
Yeah, that would be good.
Said May 10th from 10:15 to 12:15.
Okay, so next Tuesday we'll have a practice final, so that we can have a little sampler of the questions for the final exam. It's going to be about the same as exam 1 and exam 2, except we'll also have new questions for the topics that were not covered in exam 2, and it will be kind of leaning on the later topics. There'll be one question for pre and post conditions that everybody hates. But the funny part is the class did really well in exam 1, for that particular question. Most people got, points, a good amount of points on that question. So anyway, any other questions about the exam? It's open book, open notes, just like your regular exam. The time is 2 hours, so that's why there are 2 additional questions. There'll be 6 questions in all for the final exam. Any questions about the final exam?
Yep. Question about our grades on some profs. If we look at our grades, is that percentage on there for the entire semester that we have so far, or is that just what we've completed and turned in?
I believe that is for the entire semester, so it's including the 40% of the final exam, and that's why your grade is still looking really bad, because it's including the 40% of the final exam.
Well, it's not really looking too bad in that case, because then I've already passed the class, even if I don't even take the final. So.
Okay, I can check on that too. Let me make sure how the grade book is set up at this point.
I think everyone's passed the class.
I'm just making sure. That's why I'm asking.
Good. Well, that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to check.
Everyone should like see.
It's just that when I do this, I have to hide it, because otherwise you guys can see each other's grades, so that would not be good.
All I know is I have it at 51 or something percent.
Okay, so I want to see if the final exam is here. Yep, the final exam is already here, and what I need to do is to see if it's already taking up its weight in the grade calculation. It is taking up 40% of the grade. So the grade you are seeing is your actual grade if you are to quit the class today.
Okay.
Not to encourage anyone to quit the class today, but I'm just saying that that's your current grade at this point. It can only go higher, but not at lower.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Cool.
So I don't have to show up from now on.
Precisely. There's only 2 more classes.
I know.
Yeah, and we cannot trade grades either. You cannot sell your score for money.
These.
All right.
Should
What
be
do we
like
do?
one of those free
Yes,
play
go ahead.
classes.
I was just wondering what other questions will we be expecting? I noticed on the final exam, I noticed you mentioned there was going to be a pre and post conditioning one, and it's just going to be some more tracing, just some stuff.
Yeah, it's basically a combination of exam 1, exam 2, and some new questions using records and the concepts that we are talking about recently. So parameters, passing by value, passing by reference would definitely be there, and then records would be there as well. Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
Will the final have one of those really long questions like number 4?
I'll try to make sure that does not happen.
Okay.
Just make sure we can fit on the sheet.
Are you gonna have something like mod and floor for the equations?
No.
That would be really ugly. So.
Yeah, without a calculator, that would be pretty ugly. If
Even with the
if there's
calculator.
anything, I will make sure it's something you can do it by hand, like divide by 2, divide by 4, or something like that.
64.
Divide by 64 would be a little bit too much.
2 divided by 64.
There
Okay.
you go.
Any other questions? No other questions? Now, can you guys sign up for classes now for
Yeah.
360? Some people have
In
started
10
to
minutes I
sign up.
can.
Sorry?
In 10 minutes I can.
In 10 minutes.
One 360 is already
Okay.
full.
You can't fit that many units
Okay, I'm
in
not
if you're
taking it.
waitlisted.
Hmm? Sorry?
Sure, I gotta take.
I can't take all the
VB.
units because I'm
So that'll
waitlisted.
take some-
Oh.
They only let you have 12.
Some doing
Okay.
business with the-
So-
with
So
that
the
focus
class is
on
already filling
computers.
up.
Oh yeah.
The class I could
Yeah.
enroll in, I can't take because it's closed now.
Oh, okay.
And the other one I can't take because it conflicts with a chem lab. Or the lab conflicts with another class.
Okay.
360?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that
I
class
can't believe
filled
there's
up.
only two classes for 360. There's only two of them.
Well,
Yeah.
that has always been the case. The enrollment of these classes have increased. Like this class used to only have about 20 to 30 students, and this semester we have almost twice that number. Yeah,
I was wondering why you didn't teach 360.
because I was not hired to teach 360. There are two professors whose job are to teach CISP 360, and they're really good professors too. Different style, but both are good. Yep. Nope. You're good. Okay.
So I'm gonna miss the YouTube videos.
That's not necessarily the case. You can try to convince those professors to start recording as well.
Try my best.
Yep, you go ahead and try, because I already told people how to do it in Windows, so they don't have to switch to Linux to do this. I have
no fun.
instructions to tell people how to do it all in Windows for free. And if you go to some profs, you can see that there are video recordings of CISP 370, which is a Visual Basic Programming class, and that's all done in Windows. So so try your best. Okay, I think it's a good thing to have a video recording of classes, just for reviewing, and it's good for me too, so I can remember what I talked about in the previous class.
Aren't they online classes anyways?
Sorry,
The 360 classes, aren't they both
it's a
online?
hybrid. Okay, let's go ahead. Unless there are other topics you guys want me to cover, we'll go ahead and take a look at the schedule, and I will kind of map out what other classes you have to take for the computer science degree as well. If that's okay with you guys, if there's no objection, that's what we'll do next. But if there's any question, yep, go ahead.
So probably a lot of people are not going to be able to take 360 in the fall since it's already full. Like, how bad is it to skip a semester with programming?
With this, from this class to 360 is not too bad, because I think it's mostly just concept in this class, and it's not something that you have to do by hand. Because from 360 to 400, if you skip one semester, that can be bad, because they're both based on the C++ programming language, and it's much more specific than stuff that we talked about in this class. Stuff that we talked about in this class, like loops and conditional statements and stuff like that, they're more conceptual than there's not much syntax that we talked about in this class. But from 360, which is C++, to 400, which is object-oriented programming, you need to retain what you know about the syntax of C++. So having a gap there will hurt more than having a gap between this class and 360. Yep.
I signed up for an online 360 class at Folsom Lake. So I don't know if it's full time.
I think there's also a summer class at Sac City.
Yeah.
Yep. It's Professor Dixon is teaching that class. So you can try them out.
Try to go to Consumus or something.
Sorry?
Consumus, or try to take a class at Consumus or Sac City.
I think Consumus is like full.
It is?
I think there's only one on.
Everything's
they have
getting
one
full.
class, and I think
Oh,
it's
I know everything's getting full, but
It's like I'm already going to be waitlisted for my speech class, and I'm signed up for both of these speech classes for one professor. So I'm hoping to get into at least one.
must be a good professor.
today. That's what I think more interesting.
Usually the bad
Yeah.
professors are not.
I know. I went through right for my professor. I'm like, okay, I'll do this one.
Now, I cannot give you any advice in the capacity of a counselor, because your counselor is your counselor. I'm not a counselor. If you cannot get into CISP 360 in the fall, and you still want to kind of keep practicing your programming concepts and whatnot, your alternative is CISP 370. I know you may not want to waste your units and your money on something else, but if you want to kind of continue with like just practicing programming, so that you don't lose what you learned in this class, this is another class that you can consider. It may be full already as well. Yep.
I was just going to say, if you want to practice programming stuff too, there's a website called Code Academy. It's completely free and it teaches you how to do JavaScripting and whatnot. So at least it's something to keep you fresh.
Yeah, but since there's no grading, a lot of people would start and then when there's too much homework from other classes, it just kind of falls off. Yep. So cisp300 is one class that some of you can consider. It sounds like a waste of money because it really doesn't count to the computer science degree, which most of you are seeking in this class. But VB programming is another type of programming that is entirely different from cisp360. This is visual. They teach you how to design a form in Visual Basic, how to use buttons, drop-down boxes, text boxes, and how to do validation. And it's just a completely different class compared to 360. But at the same time, it still talks about the same concepts that we talk about in this class: conditional statements, variables, subroutines, passive by value, passive by reference. Everything that we talk about in this class will still be there. So it's a good class to kind of keep the engine warm, so to speak. If you want to keep, if you cannot get into 360 and these classes are still open, that's an alternative. Yep.
So if it's this hard to get into 360, how hard is it to get into 310 in the spring?
Well, that's a different story because there's a attrition from after 360. So some people will stop with 360 and not move on to additional classes after that.
True.
So by the time they get to 310, I have a really big 310 class, bigger,
well,
about the same as this class. So there's a lot of attrition happening, and
it's
most
not like
people,
20 students in that class or anything.
No, it's about 40. Yep.
Is this the first semester that it's been this crowded?
Impacted?
Nope.
No, but it has been gradually getting even more and more and more impacted. It has to do with the reduction of FTE, or full-time equivalents, and also the number of people who want to get into the computer science program. Right now, the job prospect in the Silicon Valley is really good with computer science and programming. I know people who are graduate students in Berkeley. For internship, they're making $80,000.
Hello.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that's internship.
Berkeley.
Yeah. And that's internship with Facebook, and that same person is potentially getting an interview with Google. So Google, that's going to be even bigger. It's a big jump, from Facebook to Google. So that's why people are kind of flocking in the computer science area, and because of the limited FTE, we cannot open up additional classes. 3 CISP classes, 3 P300 classes, and 2 360 classes is typically what we have been doing in the past too. So we have not really actually reduced the number of classes, it's just the number of students who want to get into the program has increased. All right, so just to make you more depressed, I'm going to give you a map of what classes you have to take to finish the computer science program.
Thanks.
And remember, I cannot put this in a recording because I'm not a counselor, so I'm not really supposed to say anything.
So this is off the record. You should probably stop recording right now and
Just
start
edit it
again.
out after.
We can just beep it out, right? It's a long beep.
Here, let me unplug this real quick.
So just keep knocking.
There you go. Keep knocking on it.
Okay, so 300 goes to 360, and 360 is a very important class because from 360 you can go to 400 and also 310. 310 is assembly language programming. It's one of those classes you want to take it without having a whole lot of other heavy-duty classes. 400 follows 360 pretty closely, so the amount of new material between these two classes is okay, but between these two classes there's a big step up. And I teach this one.
Would you recommend taking both?
But you have to take both, just not.
But I mean, at the same time.
I don't know whether are they offered in the same semester.
Fall. In spring, you have to go to spring because they're not offered in fall.
Okay, let me take a look at
Back.
Spring.
I go to spring 2012.
Yeah, certain classes, it also depends on the individual. Some people can take multiple classes together and make relate the classes. So once you can relate classes, 2 classes, can be studied as 1.5 classes. It's not really 2 classes anymore. So we usually offer, 400 and 310 and 440 are offered in the same semester. That's kind of tough because 440 goes after 430, like that. Okay, so that means if you can get into 360 in the fall or in the summer, then you'll be set up to take 310 in. This is a spring class, and this is also a spring class. And that one is a spring class too. So that means 430 is going to be a fall class.
It says 400 should be a fall class too. Right?
400 is a fall class?
I think so.
It says 430 is a correct for 440.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it's not offered in the same semester.
How is it a correct?
What's the difference between 301? I mean, obviously different classes. But
You mean from Sac City?
Oh, is it different codes for different?
Well, we are supposed, okay, the same code is supposed to be the same class. So if it is 301 instead of 300, that means the content is not exactly the same. They may be trying to use it for the same purpose, but the material they cover may not be exactly the same. And even here, when you take this class from different professors, we also teach this class slightly differently. But we have one single common objective is to get you guys ready for CISP 360.
One other question.
Go ahead.
Would you recommend, like in general, like is 360 hard to take as an online? Would you recommend in class? I mean, if you were a student, which one would you take?
Okay, I'll be very honest with you. I don't know how to teach programming classes online. It's just, if you observe, how you can just listen to one of the audio, the video recording of this class, and you can probably hear, and see the interaction in the class. People would ask questions, and I would answer the questions. It just kind of bounces a few times, and then it takes about 30 seconds, okay, to clarify something. If you're taking an online class, how do you do that? Discussion, discussion can be good because sometimes other students can chip in, and answer questions. But for the most part, the turnaround time is much longer when you're taking an online class. It depends on the professor as well. Some professors have their cell phone linked into that email, and they do it while they're driving. Okay, not a good thing, but good for you because you get a response right away. But even so, if you are not interactively asking questions, it still takes a few more rounds to clarify, what you're asking, and then whether the answer is actually answering your question. So I don't know how to teach programming classes online. I mean, I just don't know. I think it's hard. I think it's really difficult to teach classes online. To take classes online, I think it takes a different skill set as well. So we are looking at fall again?
Yeah, you're in fall.
This is fall, okay.
Yeah.
So we want to look at P.
So if you have 400.
430. I'm looking for 4.
You have 400. Okay.
Okay, 400 and 430 are both. So 400 is fall and spring, and then 430 is fall only. So that's how everything is mapped out. This is also spring as well as fall. So you have to kind of map out your classes and see if you can take some of these classes before a certain time, so that you don't get an entire year of delay. So this is a bottleneck because it is only offered once a year in the spring. This is a bottleneck because it's only offered in the fall, and this one is also a bottleneck because it's only offered in the spring.
So what you really want to do is take both cisp 400 and 310 at the same time in the spring. That way you can take cisp 340 in the fall.
Right.
That's nice.
Yep. If you can take, this one is also in the summer, because if you go to another college, you can take CISP 360 in the summer. So that means you can get this one out of the way, and then in the fall, you'll be ready for CISP 400. So you can knock 400 out of the way. So by the time you get to spring, you only have to deal with 310, but you still have to wait another semester to go to 430, and then another semester to go to 440. So it's kind of messy.
We need more classes.
We need more classes, yes. We need more money.
We need more money.
Yeah, we need more money to offer more classes. Yep.
In general, like those 400 level classes, are those like direct translation to university, like for Sac State?
Yes. A very good resource that many of you probably know already, but they don't really teach people how to use this website is assist.org. How many people know assist.org already? Very good. So this is basically how you can look up how courses here are articulated with individual campuses, with CSU as well as UCs. The classes that are well articulated, meaning other colleges will accept. This one is usually everything other than P300 are articulated because most universities and do not have P300 classes. They start with P360. Any other questions? Yep.
So my counselor for CISP 400, CISP 310, and Calculus 2 will be the same semester.
That's usually how people do it. It's tough. It's gonna be tough.
You have no life.
I see people just doing the homework assignment all day long. If they are done with their homework, programming homework assignment, they start with a calculus right away.
Taking calculus.
The most important part of taking these classes is try to identify how each class relates to another class. 400 and 310 may not seem related because they are different type of classes, but when you can associate these classes, then it becomes easier because it's no longer a few different classes. Instead, they're related, and it's easier to study that way. Any other questions? No other questions? Has anyone already signed up for the Sac City CISP 360 class? Okay, very good.
There you go.
Okay, now just one thing to keep in mind. When we teach classes, we make certain assumptions of what topics are covered. I talk to the professors here, and they talk to me, so we kind of know what each other teach in our classes. But when it's something another class from another campus, sometimes the communication is not there. So certain assumptions that we make may not hold true anymore. I typically ask the class ahead of time and say, okay, when you took CISP 360, when I teach CISP 310, I would ask students, did the class cover this particular topic? If anyone in the class raise their hand and say, no, my professor did not teach that concept, I would cover that topic, but in a very brief way so that it doesn't take up a lot of time. So you kind of have to keep that in mind. Okay, any other questions? No other questions? If there are no other questions, we'll move on and talk about just a little bit of object-oriented programming concepts. Okay, we are talking about stuff that will eventually be covered in CISP 400, but I think it doesn't hurt to introduce the ideas because the ideas are actually quite simple. I'll use a text editor in this case because it's not, initially there's no real coding, it's just the concepts. Okay, so think of insects, okay, like flies and bees and whatnot, okay? Okay, we'll say what a bee has. What do you think a bee has as an animal, insect?
Stinger.
Thorax. 6 legs.
6 legs, okay? 6 legs. It has a head. Has a, what are the 3 body parts?
Thorax and abdomen. Or
Thorax. Is it thorax like that?
Yeah.
And the abdomen, right? Abdomen.
Sure.
Does it look right?
Sure.
Okay.
Compound eyes.
Compound eyes. Stinger. Okay, stinger. Okay, how about the mouthpiece?
Mandible.
Well, what?
Mandible might be it.
But bees do not have mandibles. It doesn't bite, it doesn't chew. I can't remember how it's. Okay, we can look it up, but I think this is more than enough. Okay, how about flies? Oh, we forgot one thing. It has 2 wings, right? Is it 2 or 4? We'll just say wings, fine. Okay, what about a fly? I can copy and paste a good portion of what I already have, right? Just minus the stinger and add maybe no stinger, but everything else still holds true. So if I want to describe a ladybug, you can see that there's a lot of copying and pasting. How does this have anything to do with programming? We have talked about records already. So what do we use records to represent in real life programming?
Too short. Too short a program that has multiple pieces.
Okay, very good. So when you're programming, let's say you're dealing with a GUI program that can draw objects on the screen. Okay, so let's think about drawable objects. Okay, we can start with a dot. Okay, when you draw a dot, what do you need in order to draw a dot on the screen? The coordinate, right? X, Y coordinate. We can start with the position. What else do you need? Maybe the color. Okay. And if you're really fancy, you can also specify the transparency or the alpha channel.
Okay.
Transparency. It's a typo. Looks right to me. What else? What else can you specify when you specify a single dot on screen?
Size.
Okay. Well, size kind of is a dot is a dot. It only takes up 1 pixel. Okay. So we'll just leave it as that. Okay. What about a circle? If you want to draw a circle on the screen, what do you need? Well, we need position, right? We also need color, the alpha channel. In this case, we also need radius, which is missing from a dot. What about a line? When you draw a line, you have, well, you can say you have a position, and then you can specify a slope and also a length, right? And then what else do you need? Well, all the same stuff that we specified earlier: color, the alpha channel, and that's it. You can see where this is going, right? What about a rectangle? You have a position. Yeah, you can make it same as line, but you can have the other vertex, the opposite. And then everything will still be pretty much the same. You still have color and you have alpha. Okay, so I'll just kind of stop here. If you want to use a record type to represent each object you can draw on the screen, you can see that there's a lot of replication. There's a lot of stuff that we have to re-specify again and again and again. And every time when you write a program and you're copying and pasting, you have to ask yourself, can I do something a little bit better so I don't have to copy and paste all the time? And the answer is, well, I think copy and pasting is not really helpful in this case. Because if you want to change anything, in other words, if you're changing how you represent color, instead of using RGB, you can use many of the other representation. One is CYMK. Okay, RGB is good for monitors, like a projection screen or LCD screen uses RGB, red, green, and blue, because those are the 3 primary colors that when you mix them together, you can get almost all of the colors that our eyes can perceive. But when you go to print, okay, like magazines and textbooks and whatnot, you use another model called CYMK: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Okay, and it's a subtractive process instead of an additive process. So if you want to change the representation of color in this case, then you have to go through each and every single record type and say, guess what? The type of color has now changed. And that's very cumbersome. And if you forget to change one of these things, you have to do something about it. Okay? Are we doing okay so far? As far as looking at this and say there's a lot of redundancy here and a lot of copying and pasting. Is that okay so far? Okay. So let's go ahead and switch back to the first example. When you take biology, or when you will take biology, do they talk about all the different animals individually, or do they try to classify things into say, oh, these things are related, we'll put it into one category, and these categories themselves are related, we'll put it into another bigger category, and so on and so forth. That's how we deal with biology. So with these two insects, how would you say these things are similar and we put it into one category? How would you describe that category?
Insects.
Insects that fly, because there are insects that cannot fly. Okay. So you can now say, a flying insect has 6 legs, head, thorax, abdomen. I think that's a spelling mistake. Compound eyes and wings. All right. Now that we have flying insect as a classification or category, depending on how you want to call that, describing a fly is now a whole lot easier, isn't it? Because now we can go back and look at the description of a fly and say, hey, I don't need this anymore. We can say a fly is a flying insect. And then it automatically means that a fly has 6 legs, head, thorax, abdomen, compound eyes, wings, and so on. And we only have to now specify things that are specific to flies, but not to all flying insects. Okay? What would be unique to flies?
So they have that little
Suction.
called that little party corner thing.
What? Say it again.
Party corner.
It can land upside down. Flies can land upside down, and I don't think all insects can land upside down. Is that true?
Well, these are good. Well, it's not only flies, but yeah, fly is one of them.
Okay. Okay, we can say it can land upside down. Okay? Because not all flying insects can land upside down. Like, I have never seen a dragonfly land upside down. Maybe they can, but I have not observed when they can do that. What about bees? Well, bees have everything the same thing, except bees have stingers, and not all insects, flying insects, have stingers. Okay, so this is really helpful. What about ants? It's not a flying insect, even though certain certain populations or certain types of ants can fly, but in general they cannot. Okay. Yep.
Flying ants.
Okay, so we can now have a non-flying insect part, and guess what? Non-flying insects also have all of these things. You just saw what I did. Copy and paste, right? Copy and paste, bad. So what do we do to avoid the copying and pasting? Well, it's kind of like a by ref thing, but we can say insects have, or an insect has the following. So all insects will have these particular things. And now what we can do is to say flying insects. The first thing is to say flying insects. A flying insect is an insect, but it also has the following. Just wings. Okay? And I can go to non-flying insects and say a non-flying insect is an insect, but it also has, well, at this point I cannot think of anything. Okay? Do you guys see what I'm doing? I'm trying to extract all the common things of a particular category, and if two categories have a lot of things in common, I want to create an overall category to describe the common stuff between the two subcategories, so that I don't have to repeat the descriptions over and over again. Okay? This is object-oriented programming, or one important aspect of object-oriented programming. It's called inheritance. Inheritance means I can have one record to represent insects. And when I need to describe flying insect, I can say, oh, guess what? A flying insect, the record type of a flying insect, is a subclassification of an insect. Then I automatically inherit all the properties, all the members of a particular insect, but I can also add additional members like wings and so on. Okay, now getting back to our actual programming example here, now we can change this example and say drawable objects has the following. All of these are now properties or members of a drawable object. A dot is a drawable object, but I cannot think of anything else that a dot has that a generic drawable object does not have. Okay? But with a circle, I can take these out and say a circle is a drawable object, but it also has a radius. I can go to a line, take out all the things that are common with all the other drawable objects, and then we only have the slope and the length left. So a line is a drawable object, but it also has a slope and a length. And rectangle is the same thing. We just have opposite vertex as the only extra property or member of a rectangle. Once we can say a rectangle is a drawable object, but it also has an opposite vertex. Now, with this, it is very handy because every time I want to change how we want to represent color or anything else that we want to add to a drawable object, we can just make the changes here and it will affect everything that is a drawable object. Is that making any sense? This is called inheritance. I talked about inheritance a little bit, and the way you say it is a dot inherits from a drawable object. A circle inherits from a drawable object, and so on. Does that make sense?
Could you do it even further? So could you say that a square is a rectangle?
A square is a rectangle
that also has equal length sides.
Now, equal length size, is a property, but it's not an attribute that we can represent.
Okay.
So if you want to represent a square, all you need is just the length of one side because it has equal length to all sides. Yep. Because you can kind of do it the opposite way and say a dot is a special case of a circle that has a 0 radius. But we don't want to do it that way because we want to do it the opposite way.
Okay.
So we make a dot, but a circle is more complex, and then you can also make a ellipse, and that's also more specialized. Are we doing okay so far? So this is inheritance. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of write down here in object-oriented programming. There is inheritance, so we don't have redundancy when we describe stuff. Okay. The next question is, how do we call this drawable object thing? How do we call this dot? How do we call this circle? In this class, before we have object-oriented programming, we call these things records or structs in C. But in object-oriented programming, across all programming languages, these are called classes. Okay. So in this case, drawable object, dot, circle, line, and rectangle are called classes. It's just a different name, but it really means about the same thing as a record that we talked about in this class. Yep.
So you can open class files with like C++ and stuff?
You can open class.
So you're saying that their class files are open?
There are class definitions. Yeah, there are files that describe or define classes. Yes. And remember, a class is basically a record that we talk about in this class, but it has the additional ability to inherit from another class. So you can say, I'm defining this class, but I'm lazy. I don't want to repeat all the same definitions as the other class. So the only thing you have to do is to say, this class is a quote-unquote subclass of another class. When you say class A is a subclass of class B, that means class A inherits all the same members of class B. Okay. Are there any questions at this point about this aspect of object-oriented programming? Go ahead.
So in terms of the pseudocode that we were using before with records, if we were initializing a variable with a type of circle, would we have to say that it's a drawable object dot circle, or is that implied because of inheritance? Could we just give it the type circle and that it is a drawable object would be inherited? Or is that even making sense?
It inherits all the members. Okay, so that's a good question. So let's go ahead and take a look at the sample program. I'm not going to run this in a trace, but I will just show you what it looks like, or conceptually what it looks like. So instead of using record, now we use the name class to define a class. But remember, they are very similar in terms of concept. So we can say, using this particular example, we can say drawable is the name of this class. It has position, and position itself is a coordinate. We have color. Color itself, let's say, it has another record type called color. And then we have, alpha, which is probably a real number. You can make it an integer, so it ranges from 0 to 255 or something like that. Okay, so we end this class definition. When you want to define, let's say, a circle, then you have to say class circle is a drawable. So you associate, the class called circle with a class called drawable. And inside the class circle, all you have to do is to say, oh, we have one additional member in order to represent a circle, which is my radius. So radius is an integer and class. Okay. Now the question is, if I have a subroutine, let's say define, let's see here, what should I do? Okay, I'll just define a subroutine called stub so I can show you the initialization of what you can access inside a circle. Okay. So you have C as a circle as a local variable. So we'll say local C as a circle. So inside here, you definitely can set the radius of a circle. So you can say the radius of this particular circle is 20 pixels. But you can also say, C dot alpha is 255. It is completely opaque, and so on. Is that okay? And this is very handy. This is a really, really handy feature. Any other questions? No other questions? Okay. Do you still remember, abstract data type that we talked about in the previous class 1 week ago? That we want to use subroutines to access and change things instead of using the actual member? Or we do not want to refer to members as much as possible, because you don't want to open up the television and tweak the capacitors and the resistors to change the brightness and the sharpness and stuff like that. You want to use the remote control. So we want to define, remote control for our classes and records as much as we want, as much as we can. And we can do something that's really funny here, okay, that we cannot do with records. Because what we can do is now we can, inside the class definition, we can define subroutines. So subroutines are no longer outside of the definition of records. Instead, they are inside the definition of records. So inside drawable, I can say define subroutine, and I can say, okay, we'll just make it set alpha and define sub. inside this subroutine, I would say byval alpha as an integer, but I'll use a different name so it's not confusing. And then we'll say alpha gets A. That looks kind of funky, doesn't it? Because this is, for the first time, we are seeing the definition of a subroutine inside a class definition. That is another unique aspect of object-oriented programming. Because you're not only describing the members of a class. In other words, you're not only describing what are the attributes of a drawable, you're also defining what a drawable can do. Okay? And in this case, we are basically saying a drawable can set its own, can have the alpha attribute set to a particular value. Okay? So now the question is, in our subroutine, how are we going to set the alpha of lowercase c as a circle? Remember, the dot means apostrophe. We use the same notation. So in this case, to be more consistent with our syntax, we say invoke c dot set alpha. And then you can say, oh, I want this particular circle to be half transparent. So you can specify 127 as parameter A, and you don't need this line anymore. Okay. So this is new. It's kind of interesting because I'm actually demonstrating two things with one single line here. With invoke c.setAlpha 127, I'm actually demonstrating two things at the same time. One is when you look at the class circle, which is here, I never described a circle has the ability to set alpha, did I? But I don't need to. Because I don't need to because I already told you that a circle is a drawable. And inside the drawable class, I say a drawable has a particular method which is a subroutine called setAlpha. Yep.
So a subroutine within a class can affect variables that weren't established within the subroutine itself or established within the
Members,
class.
yes. It has access to the members of that class. So that's why this alpha is actually referring to the member alpha, and that's why I cannot name my parameter alpha too, because then it will be confusing.
Right.
Okay. And this is the whole concept of object-oriented programming. You are looking at things from the perspective of an object. In this case, we are looking at things from the perspective of variable c. Variable c is a circle. What does it know? Well, it knows quite a few things. It knows that it has a radius. It knows that it has a position, has a color, has an alpha channel. But it also knows it has a method, a subroutine called setAlpha that you can call in order to set the alpha value. So we're changing the perspective. Now, up to this point, you can pretty much do everything, up to this point using just records. It's just a whole lot more tedious when you do it with records. Let me give you another example. What if I have another local variable here, and p is a pixel, and since we don't have a pixel, we'll call it a dot, okay? I don't have dot here. I'll just go ahead and define the dot. Class dot is a drawable and class. Okay. Now I can do the same thing with dot. I can say, p dot set alpha, and if I want this one to be completely transparent, I can specify the alpha to be 0. But I don't need to, specify how a dot can set its alpha because it is automatically inheriting that from a drawable. Is that okay so far? This we cannot do with just records. Just in terms of concept, are we doing okay? I mean, your final exam won't have any questions about this. But I think it is important for you guys to get some exposure of the concept first. So by the time you get to P360 and 400, I think you will remember it. You may not remember who said it. That's the part that you will not remember. But I think in terms of concepts, once you understand the concept, it stays with you. You may not be able to recall it, at will, but when the professor talks about this, this will resurface and it will help you understand the concepts. Are we doing okay so far? Now, what about this? This is even more interesting. How do you draw something? In other words, can I define something like this one here? Define sub draw. How do you draw? How do you draw a drawable? You cannot, right? Because I don't know what it is yet. Is it a dot? Well, the way I draw a dot is different from the way I draw a circle. The way I draw a circle is different from the way I draw a line. The way I draw a line is different from the way I draw a rectangle, and so on. So the draw method, or the draw subroutine here, really cannot be defined. So what I can do here is to say define subdraw, and I'll just say here 2 T B D, to be defined. Okay? In other words, this is nothing more than a stub, a little reminder, and say, well, guess what? Everything that is a drawable has to specify how that particular object or how that particular thing can be drawn on the screen. But at this point, I don't know how to do it yet. I just know that there's a placeholder that these other classes will have to fill in. But by the time I know this is a circle, I know how to draw a circle. So I would say define sub draw. And inside here, I'll just specify the logic to draw a circle. And inside here, when I specify a dot, I can do the same thing. Define sub draw. And then here I can specify the logic to draw a dot. Okay. So that means by the time I get to here, I can actually say invoke c.draw, which will actually draw the circle on screen. I can also say here invoke p.draw, which will draw the pixel on screen. That part is not really surprising. I mean, this is stuff that we know already. Is that okay? What about I do something like this? I make another local variable, and this time I'll make this objects on screen. And this time, look at this. I make this an array of not circles, not dots, but an array of drawable. Okay, now this is starting to become kind of crazy because what is the purpose of this? Okay, let's say that we have an array of only 2 drawable things. It's an array with 2 elements. And this is what I can do in an object-oriented programming language. I can say obj object on screen, bracket 0, the first element, is initialized to C. Now that should be alarming. You should stop and think about this and go, well, is that really okay? I mean, it doesn't seem to be okay. I'm moving the screen up a little bit so that people can see the entire thing. Okay. It doesn't seem okay to me. What is a C? What is lowercase c?
Circle.
It's a circle. And what is object on screen bracket 0? It's a drawable. They're not the same, but they are related. How are they related? A circle is a drawable. So this is actually okay. An object-oriented programming language will allow you to do something like this. Okay? You are going from a more specific class to a less specific class. And if I can do this, I can also do something like this. Right? Because a dot is also a drawable. If I can do this with a circle, I can certainly do this with a dot. Yep.
Could you do the other way around? Could you go from a dot specific one to
Okay, that's a good question. The answer is yes, but it's not easy. Because when you go the other way around, you really have to check whether it is okay to go the other way. Because once you lost information, okay, going from a circle to a drawable is just losing information. You're abstracting it, which is okay. But when you go from a drawable back to a circle, you're gaining information. And that part, you have to be very careful when you do that. But you can do it. It's just, it's just that you have to be very careful when you do that. All right. But what is the purpose of doing this? Well, the purpose of doing this is so I can do something like this. Local I is just an integer. And now I can do something like this. I gets 0. This is the kind of thing that we have seen over and over again in this class. I is less than bar, object on screen, bar, close paren do, and while I gets I plus 1. And guess what I want to do here? obj on screen, bracket I dot draw. Okay? In other words, I don't care what you are. As long as you are a drawable, I know you know how to draw yourself. So just go ahead and draw yourself on the screen. To understand this part, I can use an analogy. So just imagine that you are the stage manager of a freak show. Okay? Nobody is laughing or reacting to it.
No, it's basically natural.
Okay, so you're the stage manager of a freak show. So there are all kinds of freaks, who want to, do their performance on stage. And you have a whole big line, you have flamethrowers, jugglers, nerds, geeks, okay? The word geek, no, nerd, what geek? I think it's geek, okay? When you look up the definition of geek, one of the example of what geeks do is, they bite the head off chickens. Okay?
Something I've never done.
Well, apparently you guys have not looked up the dictionary enough. And if you look up, say, dictionary.com, it will give you a kind of disturbing definition. A carnival performer who performs sensational, morbid, or disgusting acts like biting off the head of a live chicken.
You're not a true geek.
Sensationally morbid.
Yes.
You didn't really put sensational in there.
Sensational, yes. Okay. So now you have a whole bunch of freaks lined up and want to perform, right? Okay. Now in terms of programming, what can you do to arrange this whole thing? Well, you can do an abstraction. In other words, you don't have to differentiate between a flamethrower from a geek, from someone who puts nails through the nose and stuff like that. As far as you're concerned, they're all freaks. Okay? It's an overall description. But there's one more thing you know about these freaks. They know how to perform. So as a stage manager, you will go through this particular loop. You grab the next performer and say, well, you don't have to know. You don't have to ask, what is your act? What do? You just tell that person, oh, it's your time. You get 5 minutes to perform. Get on stage. That's all you have to do. Because the object, the freak in this case, is an object. The object knows the method, perform, or in this case, draw already. So all you have to do is to grab that person, send him or her on stage, and say perform. That is another aspect of object-oriented programming, is that you can do something like this. You cannot do anything, you cannot do something like this without object-oriented programming at all. Okay? I cannot give you the name of this particular aspect of object-oriented programming because one is not going to stay. Okay? By the time you walk out of this classroom, you would have forgotten. But you will not forget the freak show, so I know that you will remember at least that part. By the time you get to cisp300, when they talk about virtual methods and abstract methods, then you'll say, oh, freak show, I know that. Yes. But this is object-oriented programming. So what I have just done in today's class for the past 15 minutes or so is to give you a preview of object-oriented programming and why it is useful. Because almost all programming languages can deal with records. Okay, PHP, Perl, Python, and so on and so forth. They can all be, they can all implement everything that we talk about in this class. But every single one of those are also object-oriented. And object orientation gives you the ability to write programs and organize your program in a certain way that makes the program easier to maintain down the line. And that's why we have object-oriented programming. And that's why it is important. It's not the language, it's not the language feature that is important. It's why we have those features and how you look at things and how you organize things that is important. Okay? Are we doing okay so far with this? And as I said, none of these object-oriented programming concepts will be in the final exam, so don't worry about that. Worry about the pre and post conditions instead, because that will be in the final exam for sure. On Tuesday, we'll have a practice final. I'll show you, some sample questions, and we'll talk about the sample questions. And I think that's the end of today's class. We are about 4 minutes short. I'll make it up in the final exam.
So on next Thursday, it's final exam?
Correct.
At 10?
1 week from today at 10:15.
10:15, okay.
Yep.
I have 2 other finals next Thursday. So I'm wondering if I can reschedule with you maybe for
You can
following
take
Tuesday.
it earlier, maybe? Can you take it earlier?
That would be awesome if I could take it later. So
Take it later?
At the same time.
Okay.
Because that means I'm it's prep for 3 finals into this coming weekend. You know what I mean?
When are your 2 other finals on that day?
Thursday, 10 minutes after the class. Yeah, so I mean,
That can be brutal.
if it's not workable for you, if you have other finals.
Let me ask the dean and see if it's okay. Because if I make an exception for you, then
Well, ARC policy is that if you have 3 finals in one day, you can reschedule one.
I did not know that. Okay, then we can reschedule.
Okay. So I mean, is that okay for the following week, like on Tuesday? Because I work Monday.
I'll be here every day, during the final week. I'll be here mostly in the morning. So if you can reschedule that to the morning, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. If you need early morning, that's fine.
9 a.m. Would that be okay?
Yeah, in your office or?
Yeah, just come to my office, grab the question, and you can take it in the lab.
Okay, that's fine. So 9 a.m. Tuesday, be in your office. Not this coming Tuesday, but the Tuesday following.
Okay.
And I'll send you an email.
Send me a reminder. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. You're welcome.
Do we have to do the post conditions for conditional statements and while loop? We didn't have those on the other tests, so I just want to know.